What's up, everyone, and welcome to our weekly transmission of the Earthlinks podcast. Today, our crew and I will be talking about a cultural identity and the importance of multiculturalism in our modern society, with the participation of two special guests with a vast experience on the topic, Isabel Torres and Eskil Krog. We remind you that Isabel's participation will be in Spanish, since she is more used to this language.
As time goes by, our perspective on the world changes. We are suddenly more interested in new cultures, people, and traditions. We have a hunger for knowledge. We feel the need to understand how things in other places work, and we begin to interact with other cultures. But how can we describe this phenomenon? Well, we have the answer: multiculturalism.
Multiculturalism is the interaction of multiple cultures within a community. It lets people explore and inform themselves on different traditions, languages, beliefs, etc. This might sound as if it isn't that common, but surprisingly, we're daily in contact with it. Thanks to the rich ability of searching for better conditions of life, studies, living new adventures in different countries, we're able to connect with people with distinguishable ways of living.
Now we will introduce our first guest, Isabel Torres. Isabel Torres is a 28 years old, speaks 3 languages fluently and lives near the border. Her perspective about multiculturalism relies on her own context as she lives in Torreón, an important city from the state of Coahuila, but also the most interesting places of the Republic in terms of migration, as it serves as pathway for a famous train, La Bestia, best known for being the transport vehicle for many immigrants all over the Republic that come from different parts of the world.
¿Tú crees que existe una amplia conexión entre la cultura y la identidad?
100%, sí. Nosotros conforme vamos creciendo vamos adoptando nuestras costumbres y las vamos haciendo personales. Entonces eso nos va definiendo. Vamos viendo cómo, no sé, el Día de Muertos, que es algo muy mexicano, impacta en cada uno de nosotros. Hay quienes lo celebran y quienes no, pero el momento en que tú estás fuera de México y ves algo del Día de Muertos, dices, ok, México, vamos. Aunque tú no lo festejabas antes, tú no lo celebrabas antes, te da tanta identidad al ser mexicano, una festividad así, que te marca.
¿A qué aspectos de tu contexto cultural crees que puedes adquirir esta perspectiva?
Ok, yo creo que tiene mucho que ver todas las tradiciones de mi familia. Siento que mi familia fue poniendo como todas las cartas en la mesa para que yo fuera decidiendo hacia dónde quería irme y a cuál le daba más importancia. Creo 100% que tiene que ver mi familia.
Ok, pues nos dijiste la última vez que eres de Torreón y está justo en la frontera entre Estados Unidos y el país. ¿Cuál crees tú que es el impacto de la multiculturalidad en esta ciudad? O sea, con todas las migraciones de migrantes, por ejemplo, de Haití, o de personas incluso extranjeras de Estados Unidos.
Mi estado tiene frontera, entonces de hecho por aquí pasa el tren de La Bestia por mi estado y de hecho hay muchísima gente de otros países que están tratando de llegar a Estados Unidos. Hay positivo y negativo. La verdad es que hay muchísima gente que adopta a estas personas que están en tránsito, trata de apoyarlos y se hace como comunidad y adoptan sus costumbres y se enriquece. En otras partes la gente es muy cerrada y entonces tiende a como criticar a estas personas y lo que están haciendo. Cierran este proceso de la multiculturalidad, como que no abren esta parte de conocer gente nueva.
Isabel's opinion about multiculturalism was highly influenced by the fact that she lives in an important city from the country in terms of migration. Consequently, she has to face in her daily life with the effects of multiculturalism, as Torreón is full from people all over the continent, especially Central America.
¿Piensa que su cultura está siendo amenazada de alguna manera?
Yo no creo, porque creo que los mexicanos somos muy apasionados con lo que nosotros hacemos. Sí podremos adoptar cosas de otros países, pero no creo que dejemos de ser mexicanos. O sea, yo creo que nosotros siempre nos vamos a reconocer como tal. Donde creo que está en peligro es aquellas personas que nacen en otro país y tienen ascendencia mexicana. Siento que ahí están como jugando un poco a quién le hago caso. Pero los que nacemos en México, siento que es muy difícil que nos cambien como nuestra cultura.
Sí. ¿Cuál cree que es el rol de los medios en esto de la migración y de la visión que otros tienen?
Siempre he creído que depende mucho del tipo de medio, eso es como vamos a reaccionar. Creo también que depende de la cadena de medios, va a dar un enfoque distinto. Si es más conservadora, si es más liberal, cuál es como el objetivo de esa cadena, es lo que nos va a transmitir. Entonces creo que sí, el objetivo de los medios es informarnos, pero nosotros tenemos una obligación de seleccionar esa información, procesarla y decidir de qué lado estamos, ¿no?
Now we will introduce our second guest, Eskil Krog. Eskil is 51 years old and speaks 6 fluent languages, has visited many countries, and was born in Denmark. We learn about the experience of a person who has been around many countries, languages, traditions, types of people. It was interesting to listen about how multicultural the world is and how nowadays it is more common than it used to be.
Well, thank you for having me. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
As a person who has met many countries and different people, what would you say is the best thing that you have learned through your experiences?
People are not that different, but cultures are quite different from one another. In my culture, we tend to be perhaps not very traditional, and sometimes that can get you in trouble. To treat foreigners the way that you would treat a Danish, you could get into trouble, and that has happened to me once or twice. And I made a joke that I shouldn't have. So I guess that one should be a little bit more reserved about how you treat people from other cultures that you don't know.
The second question is, as a person who has visited many countries, met various types of people, and got to learn about different cultures, did you ever find yourself culturally shocked?
I've also had the pleasure to visit Mexico, and it shocked me how nice the people are in Mexico. Very convivial. They would open their arms and invite you in. And that's very different from Denmark, where we don't have time for so much socializing as I know that you do in Mexico, and I don't.
For better understanding of their points of view, we had to reflect on the tradition and the way of behaving in other countries, as well as on their beliefs. Valuing openness is really important because when someone is open-minded, they tend to receive and respect other cultures or ideas. This makes possible for an easier coexistence and environment made out of respect for everyone.
What is the impact of multiculturalism in Denmark?
Living in Europe for many centuries, in history we've had French people, we've had Dutch people come to us. But of course, things like that have accelerated enormously with globalism. So we have a society that is changing, and hopefully it's changing in a good way, but things are moving very, very quickly, especially for the older generation. They don't always understand what's going on. So we have a more diverse community. I think it's difficult to assess the impact. I think there are both good and bad things connected with this, but we certainly have a more diverse everyday life in Denmark.
Okay, so the third question is, has the arrival of immigrants in Denmark affected the culture?
Yes and no. I mean, to a large extent, some of these new arrivals or new immigrants, they kind of live in a parallel society. They form their own culture in Denmark, probably much like the culture that they fled from, that they escaped from. I guess that our culture has not changed dramatically, but it's become more divided. Mixing the cultures was probably what we hoped for when we took in so many new immigrants. But unfortunately, many of these immigrants like to keep for themselves, like to live among themselves, and like to cherish their own culture.
Different ideas make people think with other points of view and perspectives. Based on the different points of view of Isabel and Eskil about some concepts that we've studied, we think it's relevant to be empathetic toward other perspectives because there is never one absolute truth, and something that may be regardless for someone can also be a major problem for a person who is dealing with it daily and is suffering the direct consequences from it, like migration, cultural appropriation, and differences between cultures.
On the other hand, in a society who is dealing with several problems regarding the acceptance of people with different mindsets, cultures, and identities, it's essential to preserve not only the respect and tolerance among us, but also to promote the existence of many cultures from different parts of the world. This being the only chance we have to evolve as human beings, regardless the origin each of us has. And finally, building up a society full of knowledge and whose members work together with the aim of improving it every single day of their lives.
This was Earthlings Podcast.